Yeah, doing hard things is embracing the suck. If I could teach any kid, it's like, hey, I know it sucks. It's never going to change. So you got to change your mindset about the suckiness. Find a way to derive joy from it. Even if, the workout, half the time, I enjoy working out. Running is maybe a little bit different. I don't love running, but I love the feeling of finishing a run. That's my motivation to come back. But it's not at the beginning of the run.
All right. For today's episode, I'm very excited and nervous because we're going to do something very different. And I've asked my producer and friend, Kevin Palmieri, to come on and effectively grill me on lessons learned, what I'm doing wrong, and to tell me what I'm missing if I'm not seeing it. So first, Kevin, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I told my wife before this, I said, I have this producer episode I'm doing and I'm very nervous. So you and I are in the same boat, my friend.
Well, why are you nervous?
You intimidate me, man. Yeah, if I'm being very honest, you intimidate me. Nothing about you. It's not your I just feel like you're intense in a good way and it's intimidating.
You're not alone. I
I
I
can
think
imagine.
a common phrase might be that I'm intense, but I certainly don't want to intimidate you. Thanks for sharing that.
Of course.
Well, I'm all yours, man. I'm ready to get into it.
Okay. All right. So I wanted to start with a question because one of the things that I was very intrigued by when you and I started working together was the fact that you were into philosophy.
Yes.
What is if you had to break down your life's philosophy into one sentence, what would it be?
Perseverance in the pursuit of your objectives. So I think loosely that's how I define success.
Mm.
But entailed in that, I think revolves around the work. I know you reference that quite a bit in your own episodes and in your own content. But it's about learning from your mistakes, and I think I probably felt too much growing up as a kid, and even some point in my adult life as well, where it prohibited me from actually gleaning the value from the lesson to move on. There was an emotional component, and so I think that philosophy really boils down to how can I be a better resource to myself and put my oxygen mask on first so that I can be a better resource to first my family and then my friends and other people, including clients and investors and, everybody.
Do you feel like have you ever swung too far to the no feeling at all logic?
Sure. And I think I veered toward logic. I'm glad that you brought that up because I think a lot of people think philosophy is a bunch of people sort of just walking around talking about nonsense. But it's based in logic. Logic, the first class I ever took was logic, and that's what drove me. It's mathematical in a lot of ways. But that was an antidote. I sought it out because I knew it was a medicine to me for, I think, how much I probably processed feelings. I mean, I was in a household, it's a South Texas Mexican family, and everybody wore their heart on their sleeve. And that's not always welcome in an intellectual setting or a professional setting, certainly.
How do you use that from a leadership perspective?
Well, I think it's an ebb and flow, and I appreciate you asking that because I think this show has helped me become a better listener. I've not been a very good listener, and when I don't when I see leadership, I think the best leaders don't come off as a leader. They just are one, right? They exercise the right actions, the right thoughts. They serve as a leader by what they do, not what they say. And to the extent that I can be a leader in that capacity, I certainly seek to be. But to the extent that somebody comes and seeks that out or asks questions, I think the first thing I go to is a Socratic method. It's like, I can't provide you any advice that you can't provide yourself. I may be able to ask the right questions. But in listening, I think one must be emotionally astute. and read between the lines, which I'm still learning how to get better at. I've got a
Forever.
2-year-old that helps to stretch that muscle.
So I've seen a lot of, I would consider you a high performer. You're very successful. You do a lot of stuff. Which of these, and I'm just shooting from the hip. We're going to see where
Let's let it fly.
we go. Which of these resonates with you the most? Ready, aim, fire, or fire and then figure it out after? Which of those is Marcus in a nutshell?
I'm ready, aim, fire. I do a
Okay.
lot of research. I plan things out, and my wife is a little bit more fire and figure things out, which has been and some of my partners have been more like that. And I think there's a balance because the paralysis analysis is a real thing. And, but I will say, as it relates to like this podcast, I probably thought on it for too long, but it was the right timing. I'm glad that I didn't rush it. But what it entailed me doing is really building out a system that prevented me from failing. And I'm happy to share like how I view this, but by setting up systems that allowed me to continue to fulfill the objective that I was seeing, no wiggle room, no way to get out. If I had fired and figured it out, I think it could have been overwhelming. So the idea that I built out this system to try and chip away at it in bite-sized pieces helped me quite a bit.
What was the thing that got you off of the fence? Because this is a very common thing.
Sure.
You paid us and then you ghosted me for like a year. Marcus, I have dozens of people who have done that.
Yeah.
And they will not respond to my messages. They wish me Merry Christmas and then they ghost me again. What was the thing that got you off the fence?
Timing. It was timing. And so like that was a small system that I built intentionally. I knew if I paid you, I was going to have to do something. I just didn't know when. So, and you know, the last year has been a really tough one, professionally, in the real estate market, with my son. There's other family stuff, not dissimilar to anybody who's listening or you know, we all have our own stuff. So I'm not trying to cry foul here, but I will say it threw me. And so I needed to build myself back up to the point where I could be an authentic self in a way that I felt, that was true to me. Right. Which is, um, I'm real, but I am positive. I think I'm an optimistic person, but I try and investigate the negative components to make sure that I'm aware of them. It's a risks assessment, and so I think really what changed was I began doing a lot of writing, um, and you know, one thing I would give a message I'd give to anyone, certainly myself, and I've done it throughout my life here and there, but I'm attempting to make it as consistent as sleeping a day every day is writing. And people think like, well, what do you write about? Why are you writing? Because I sort of know my own thoughts. Well, when you write, you start to realize there are parts of your lines of thinking that need additional work, or something becomes illuminated. And through that, I realized, and there's some other things like, you know, I Tim Ferriss suggested this 6-part documentary series called The Power of Myth with Joseph Campbell, which has changed my life. And it's about really, you know, myth from a variety of perspectives, different religions, different philosophies, Eastern, Western, Native, you know, all of these different types of religions, and how these themes sort of intertwine. But one thing that kept surfacing was following your bliss, identifying like, you know, who you are. Because if we're being successful as humans, we get better at being ourselves, right? I mean, that is the truest mark of success, is being true to yourself. And I always thought it would be identifying what that is, but in reality, what the writing allowed me to start realizing was pulling back what wasn't me. And that's almost easier. I shouldn't say that. It's simpler, but it's challenging to do. And in that writing, to answer your question, which is long-winded now, the short answer is, I started realizing what voice was my own and which ones were not, because of the writing. And once I started listening to myself, it was clear it was time. This was a calling.
Did you have any voices that you had to let go of that had become part of your identity that were really hard to let go of?
Absolutely. Well, and
share
if not let them go, uh, you know, to use the Jim Collins analogy about seats on the bus, there were other voices driving the bus. And so I need to put myself up there. But the first was to remove the people that were driving the bus. And so some of those people were kicked out, and some people still have value. They're just on a lower volume.
How do you deal with that? How do you deal with one of the things? So I'm in the self-improvement space, right? That's our jam. And one of the hardest things that people go through is growing, outgrowing, growing in a different direction, whatever it is. People, places, things, ideas, feelings, all that. What's your relationship with? I'll label it outgrowing, but maybe realigning. How have you experienced that in your life?
Outgrowing or realigning with relation to other friends or people.
Yeah, people in general, I'd say. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been fortunate that like a core group of friends have been very supportive through this, and I think it really establishes who they are. So you start to identify when you come out with something like this, and I know it sounds ridiculous, but like putting this out there for the first time was among the more nerve-wracking things I've ever done. And looking back on it, I can see why, but I don't feel the same way I did before, and I knew that that's why I had to do it. Um, Miles Davis has an autobiography, but he talks about when he boxed. A common theme among novice boxers is when a punch is being thrown, you pull back, which actually makes the punch worse. Instead, you're supposed to lean in, and when you lean in, you get the back of the head. And I see that in the same way as problems, and so it's actually been relatively easy because when you realize there's only two types of people in the world, and you can categorize it in a spectrum, but it is binary. It's people that expand you, they give you energy, they give you power, they make you more interested, they care about you by they may not like you, but they care about you by asking questions, by finding out more about you. And then there's everyone else. They can be zeros, but if you're a zero, you're a negative. They're gonna slow you down. And it's not an easy thing, but it's natural if you just start focusing. I didn't need to proactively remove anybody. It was sort of natural as this has developed to sort of just follow what makes sense to me. And I'm finding new people of my tribe, which is the most joyful part of this.
It is one of the, I mean, you're doing your own thing. You're essentially, I think this is why it's so nerve-wracking. You're sharing to a degree your core values, your core beliefs, and your core aspirations. And you're saying, hey, if you're down for this, if you enjoy this, you'll love what I do. What are what's your number one core value? What's your number one core belief? And then what's your, I don't know if it can be a number one, but what are your core aspirations as a human?
My number one value, I think, is integrity. I think that comes with authenticity. I think it's weaving all of your actions into the same purpose, and being truthful to that. A lack of hypocrisy in how you pursue things. That's not to suggest you can't change. I would sort of move that into evolution more than hypocrisy, but it's got to be thoughtful. Um, my number one belief is that I have all the agency I need to do what I want. There's no one else to blame. The world comes down on you. It sucks. Everybody's had it. But you just stay at it and you do the work. And over a number of years, you start to realize like you still survive and you can still get through it. And my number one aspiration, I think, is to be the best human being I can be. And to serve as many people as I can while serving myself as well. And that starts with my family. And I think I've probably, I'll give an odd example that's always stuck with me. Years ago, I did a triathlon, not an Ironman, a sprint triathlon. And so the last leg is the run, and it was maybe I want to say it was a 4.5 mile run, give or take. And I'm struggling, and they mark the calf of each of the participants with their age. And I was struggling, and when I work out or when I run, I get very into myself, and I started losing energy. I started feeling bad, and there was a 74-year-old man running who was paralyzed on one half. So he'd run with a gimp, just one arm pumping. And I ran with him for, I don't know, half a mile, just sort of pumping him up. And he just gave me so much energy, not because of him, but because I connected with him. And it taught me something that, like, you're so much better when you start to connect with people and build something together. Even that moment, he may not even remember me, but that has changed. I never run with my face down anymore. It gave me a different perspective about getting out there. And so I think that's my number one aspiration, is to try and serve however I can, whatever that is.
I have to consult my notes for this because I'm going to connect something you just said to something else. So you just mentioned perspective, and you did a post on LinkedIn about the point of the podcast was to create thought-provoking content that shifts perspective, and it creates the opportunity to do that. What's the difference between something that shifts perspective and something that doesn't? Is it the person? Is it the relationship with the thing? Like, there might be a lot of people that would have that experience that would take nothing away.
Yeah.
What do you think shifts the most perspective in humans?
Well, I think you have to be open. Open to being wrong, specifically, to be encountered. But I also think there's an X factor, which is about timing, right? Like, sometimes it hits you at the right time. I've read books before that I thought were terrible, and I read them 10 years later, and it was terrific. I mean, an example, and also it's not necessarily something unheard of before that strikes you different. It's not necessarily something new. It's just framed in a way that connects with you. And I'll give you an example of Power of Now, Eckhart Tolle. I think a lot of people would roll their eyes at. And I read it at a time this last year, at a time where it seemed very actionable to me. It was like, it would just root right into how I was viewing the world and how I could persevere with headwinds. Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson is Buddhism repurposed. But it's terrific. And a lot of people say it's a throwaway read, but there's real brilliance in there. So I think I would just say the openness to being wrong and the openness to timing, I guess.
How has your relationship with being wrong evolved as you've evolved as a human?
Have you seen the competence triangle, where there's it starts at the bottom, and it's in
Oh,
it's,
yeah.
It's
unconscious
incompetence. You don't know that you're incompetent. And then what you're incompetent about. So my point being, sort of the more the more you realize what you don't know. So I think I've grown. I never liked being wrong, especially in my 20s, a little bit less so in my 30s. I don't love being wrong now, but I'm a lot more open to it.
So you spoke a little bit about belief and that type of stuff. What is your take on the law of attraction, and how is that shifted throughout your life?
So I was recently having a conversation with a group to join their mastermind. And a big common theme is, having like-minded people and people that enjoy being around each other. And I think all of that's true. But I think you need to be aware of that, how that attraction takes place, because we're all attracted to shiny things. I had a friend that I would see every quarter, was literally the funniest human being I'd ever met. And I'd walk out of there and I'd be like, I know nothing about that guy. So it was so much fun to hang out with him, but I didn't grow except my humor muscle. So I guess the reason I bring that up is because, as it relates to productivity, improvement, and all that sort of stuff, I think it's really important that you find people that are going to challenge you. And especially in today's world where the algorithm takes over, there's so much about AI. I'm hoping to have a panel in 2025 to talk a little bit about this. But there's so much about AI that's so riveting and so beneficial. But I'm really, my number one concern about that is that we become even more siloed than we are if you follow a certain train of people within politics on X. That's all you're going to see. And I think we got to be really careful about, sometimes you got to take your medicine, and that medicine entails differing opinions.
The reason I asked about the law of attraction, I was on a podcast recently, and I think there were two counselors or therapists, and they said, "What's your take on it?" And I said, "I very much appreciate it, and I think it's something to be utilized, but I don't think you should give away your accomplishments to the fact that it was the law of attraction, because then I think it negates all the hard work. Did the law of attraction help me get where I am? Yeah, in some way, shape, or form. But it was also the fact that I've worked every day for the last 8 years to get here. So that's why I ask, because I think it's really easy, especially with somebody who struggles with self-belief, to say, well, it's the law of attraction. I manifested this. I want to make sure you give yourself credit too. That's why I asked. I'm always curious.
Well, so that's a little bit, I see that as a little bit distinct but related, because I think in some ways that could be synonymous with luck.
Right.
And everybody gets lucky, but it's a sort of a played out phrase. But the more you box out, the more lucky rebounds you get. It's pretty simple, right? And you can't get lucky from behind closed doors. You have to get out there and bump bodies and see what shakes free, because it's not, luck doesn't just, you don't, lightning doesn't strike you if you're buried in a hole.
I can try, but I don't know
Yeah,
if
it's
it's
not
gonna.
gonna
I don't
do
know if
it.
it's gonna get through. I think that's really sound advice. What is the best, and you can keep it anonymous, best and worst piece of advice you've ever gotten?
When I was young, my dad always said, follow your compass. And I never, it was one of those things you roll your eyes at. And I've never stopped thinking about that. In fact, the older I get, the more I think about it. And that goes to following your bliss and that type of thing. Worst advice, I'd have to really think about it, because I try to throw out as much bad advice as I can.
Yeah, understandable. Is there anything close to the top you can remember?
um, I don't think it's a specific piece of advice, but something I've become increasingly comfortable about. But I think there's an old school thought that you can only do one thing. You are your profession. You can only be this. And if you look at the greats, if you look, I refer to the Stoics as who I'm sort of thinking about, but these are people who were industrious. They were enterprising entrepreneurs. They were warriors. They were philosophers. They were wrestlers. They had full active lives with no technology, and still remained engaged and pursued the art of living. So throw that shit out, man. You can be whoever you want to be, and you can be multi hyphenated. I think it's become more acceptable in today's world than it used to be. But be interesting.
I dig that. Do you have well, I'm sure you do. Who is your hero that you've met?
Heroes come in a large swath, and I think it is a cop out to some degree to give it this, because um, I think about my grandfather who was orphaned. He came from Mexico. He ended up finding his way. He served in the military for some time. He was just really loyal to his family. He kept providing, even now that he's deceased. He still, he provided for my grandmother after he was long gone. And he didn't have much, he didn't hardly had any pennies to rub together, but he always did was right. He gave up drinking, not to suggest that was right, but it was an issue, and so he stopped. He gave up smoking. I think there are other heroes that are probably in brighter lights that I could think of, but at its core, it's about serving your true self and what matters most. And serving your family is the best thing you can ever do. And I have a new perspective as a dad.
Mm.
It's different, like serving to your parents, it's one thing, but when you serve as a parent, it gives it new meaning. It's a different thing.
What is the new meaning? As somebody who doesn't have children and most likely never will, explain to me.
That could be a whole separate podcast that would last about 6 hours.
I'm sure it will be at some point.
But one thing about something I didn't expect about being a father, the one thing I'll say is it's taught me to learn how to learn better, because I see my son going through frustrations. Again, he's 2, so I've experienced very little as it relates to being a parent. I'm only 26 months in. That being said, seeing his frustrations, seeing how he works through things, has forced me to reevaluate how I'm working through things. Because if I'm going to teach him anything, I need to have mastered it myself. And an earmark of mastery is being able to teach it. And when you try and teach it unsuccessfully, you realize you have not mastered it, which was a large part of actually starting this podcast. But you have a duty. You see this helpless creature, and then it becomes a unit. And that part of serving that unit, and then you sort of serve the unit, and it's his cousin, and it's my brother and sister-in-law, and new uncles and aunts, and all of this other family. And you start to realize, like, before you start to build it out, we're all sort of related. We're like,
yeah.
we're all like that. And when you see through the lens of a child, I think there's just a much bigger commitment to having a future that is protected and well served. So it's about serving that. I mean, my son is the anchor point to a broader community of serving that community.
It's very surreal when you realize it's a unit. Like I never really anticipated getting married. That was never something I really planned on. And now I'm deeply in love and I have an amazing relationship. But there's a little part of me that loves when my wife comes home and has had a rough day and needs a hug. Like there's a piece of me that it just feels so surreal to feel that. That's the best way I can use to explain it. It's just surreal.
It is. By the way, something I learned, which has helped me, I don't know if it'll help you, but
Please.
When somebody has a rough day, when it comes to my wife now, I ask, do you want to be helped, heard, or hugged?
Yes.
Because I had a tendency to try and fix things.
Same. So ours is, are you looking for a shoulder or a strategy?
There you go. Because
I would come in and say, oh yeah, no, here we go. This is the 5 ways to fix it. Sometimes people just want to hear that sucks.
Get out.
They just need a hug. They just need a hug. All right. This is one of my favorite questions ever to ask because I think it's super weird. And it comes from the fact that oftentimes people will ask me about how I've changed over the last decade. And just for context, single mom, didn't know my dad, no college. Not a lot of people were rooting for my success. They didn't think it was gonna happen. And I often say that there's this piece of me that imagines 25-year-old Kev would be triggered by 35-year-old Kev.
Tell me more. What do you mean by that?
I would think I was arrogant.
Mm-hmm.
And just the way, don't you ever get sick of seeing yourself on camera, Kev? You're on camera every day. You do an episode every day. Like there has to be some underlying stuff there that hasn't been dealt with. I think that I think now in a way I kind of represent everything that I was triggered by when I was younger, which scares me, honestly. That part scares me. What would 25-year-old Marcus think of Marcus today?
I probably can share a little bit about that. I mean,
please.
It sounds a little bit self-indulgent to put who are you to put your thoughts out there? Who are you to have this show? But in today's world, I've just sort of realized 2 things. One, you don't want to listen to it. You don't have to. It's pretty easy. You just
it's the beauty of it.
On.
Right.
But also, for posterity's sake, nobody may read it. Nobody may hear it. Maybe nobody watches it, but I've got something that's at least out there. I stood for something. Yeah. And my son could see it. down the road, and maybe I hope he's not embarrassed by it, but hopefully, I stand by something. I was fighting for something. What was your question though? It was, am I triggered by anything?
No, what would 25-year-old you think of you today?
It's so interesting because I think I'd be a massive success in my mind in 25. There were certain things I wanted to do. I mean, I wanted to own assets. I wanted to have independence. I wanted to work with great people, have a good network, have people who cared about me, be able to go enjoy life. But what I thought that you sort of arrive there. It's this utopia. And what you realize is like, there's problems, man. There's problems everywhere. Every great business operator is simultaneously having a high and a low. One deal's going great and one deal is in the shitter. And the trick is to navigate that with steadiness. And that part, I think I've got a lot to learn. The better, I wouldn't say a different question that I think is really important. That's helping me as a sort of a journaling prompt is, what is my 60 and 80-year-old self going to say to me right now?
Yeah. You didn't let me get there. That was queued up for the future. You beat me.
Oh, I
to it.
apologize. But
No,
that
it's
to
okay.
me is like, it really calls into question like who I'm going to be. And honestly, what the hell does a 25-year-old know about the future?
I know.
I mean, I'm a failure because I wasn't on a Playboy jet, as a billionaire because, leading the Leonardo DiCaprio life. Like, why would, that seems great, but that wasn't my dream. That was a dream that seemed attractive. That was the law of attraction that wasn't me. That was just shiny objects.
Mm. What do you think today is your biggest weakness, and how has it evolved over time?
Well, listening was certainly among, if not the biggest. I'm much better at that now. But I still have a ways to go. I think I'm impatient. Intensity, you brought it up. You're not the first person to have brought it up. In fact, one of my very good friends who's on the show, Sunil, was giving me comments on his episode and sort of the others, and was like, he gave the example. I saw him not that long before or after, and he said, you got off the plane and you just immediately started attacking me with questions about the bigger things in my life. And it was just so you. And there's part of me that's like, oh, that sucks. But that is me. So maybe I think I can express better compassion because honestly, I think I've built up a shell around what I think is a softness in me. And so I probably, like I said, use logic and stuff to disguise it. But I think I think I need to be a little bit softer. And a child is helping build some of that. So that's probably.
I have a weird relationship with men because I grew up without a dad. So for me, directness is intimidating. So I think that's the big thing for me is the intensity is the directness. And I've never gotten that from a man before. So I don't always know how to navigate it.
Yeah.
That's a thing I've been working through. I'm not going to therapy right now. I'm in the process of finding therapists, but that's going to be the thing is like, hey, I need some help with my deepest fear is disappointing others, especially men.
That's interesting. Yeah, I have a big fear of disappointment too, for the record. Disappointing others. But if I could give you one perspective is our life is smaller than a sand pebble at a beach. And when you're gone, it's gone, and within 2 generations, no one's going to give a fuck who you are.
Yeah.
So do what you got to do. I mean, that's something I keep telling myself too.
Well, I want to do well.
Yeah.
You gave feedback one time on something we did. I think you asked for something to be done on a certain date and the team messaged and said it might not be. And you said something that really stuck out to me. It was like, that's really a really good way to deliver that. You said, that's disappointing. Something like, that's disappointing. Is there any way we can get it done faster? And I really appreciated the way you said you didn't say you guys are terrible or whatever. That's disappointing. You just shared with us how you felt. I appreciated that level of communication very much.
Well, I'll give you credit. You and your team have been, and I'm not just shooting hot air here, incredible for somebody just starting out, first of all, but secondly, very adaptable. And I know that no two clients are the same. And I know that I probably had a specific idea of what I had in mind, but I've incorporated a lot of your input because I don't know what I don't know. You're the expert here. So I give a lot of credit to your team for being adaptable, because I think if it weren't like that, I would have been between a rock and a hard place and searching for an alternative.
Well, I appreciate it. And you and I have had a lot of conversations behind the scenes, and there's always moving pieces, and it's customer service is a whole thing.
Yeah, no joke. I get it. Let me ask you a question though. How would you prefer to be approached?
Oh man, just tell me I'm great.
Way?
Yeah, just tell me I'm great, and then don't contact me until you tell me I'm great again. I don't know. I think for me, I
asked so that I can deliver this better, right?
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
That's a good way. When you get to know the person, you get to know it's not personal.
Right.
That's for me. When you get to know the person, no, Marcus is probably in between meetings, or he just went for his 5 a.m. run. He's just shooting a message. Intuitively, I think you get an idea of somebody's communication style. And then when you do, you can work from there, because there's some people who say, well, I'm direct. It's like, I just think you're a dick. Yeah. I think you're just a dick and you're looking for justification.
I agree.
So no, I don't think there's anything. I think for me, it's getting to know the human helps understand.
No question.
That's hugely beneficial. And I think that's where emotional intelligence comes in. And that's something that now more than ever, I think is supremely important.
I think one of the guests I had, who's a longtime friend, Marty Wiener, is an engineer, and he helped to build Pinterest and Reddit. And the number one thing, he didn't use the word outright, but everything he was talking about was the importance of emotional intelligence. So it struck me as meaningful that an engineer was highlighting the importance of emotional intelligence. And I've also found all my friends who are engineers, of those who are engineers that also had the ability to connect with other people, are without question the most successful people I know.
Interesting.
To combine analysis with emotional intelligence, but the emotional intelligence also gets coupled with the ability to communicate.
Yeah.
But that to me that's the sweet spot.
What do you think other than that, what are the top 3 attributes for success, assuming somebody has an understanding of what success means to them?
Doing hard things.
Okay.
Is number 1.
Grit,
yeah,
would you say?
Exactly. And that's hard things includes when you don't want to do them, not just doing hard things when it's convenient for you. Consistency.
Okay.
One thing I've learned is on a day-to-day basis, the needle is not moving at all, but 1 week it will move tremendously. And it may be 6 months from then or 4 months from then, but if you're doing the work in the right way, open to suggestions, what you might be missing, I think that's a second component. And then endurance is the ability to sustain it for a long time. I mean, I rewatched The Last Dance, the Chicago Bulls documentary series, and it's remarkable to win a championship, but it's almost unfathomable to do it 6 times. To keep repeating that, because believe it or not, you think it gets easier, but the odds start to stack against you more and more, and you have to redefine your purpose. So maybe endurance is tied to purpose, to be honest, because I think you have to have a strong enough desire as to why you're doing it in order to justify the 5 a.m., the 11 p.m. You know it. I see all your photos of the gym at ridiculous hours.
Got to do what it takes. My goal is to be the most consistent human being possible. That's what we're after.
What a great epitaph to have on your.
It's brutal though. It's brutal. I think consistency is one of those things that it looks sexy eventually, but the behind the scenes in the mud is just
Sucks.
nothing short of brutal. It's just
Well, that's yeah. Doing hard things is embracing the suck. If I could teach any kid, it's like,
yeah.
hey, I know it sucks. It's never going to change. So you got to change your mindset about the suckiness. Find a way to derive joy from it. Even if, the workout, half the time, I enjoy working out. Running is maybe a little bit different. I don't love running, but I love the feeling of finishing a run.
Yeah.
That's my motivation to come back. But
Yeah,
it's not at the beginning of the run.
No, it sucks. It's brutal.
Yeah.
I watched a TED Talk, and again, don't quote me on this because I haven't done the full research, but essentially it said something along the lines of the people who are the most consistent are the people who hold conflict in their head longest. Meaning they don't make a choice and say, you know what, screw it, I'm not going to the gym. They think about it and they think about it and they think about it and they hold the conflict of the person they want to be versus the person they're showing up as. You ever heard of that?
Absolutely. I'm trying to actually find this quote, but a true, I'm butchering it, but the true mark of intelligence is to be holding two disparate thoughts simultaneously.
Yep.
And I think there's a lot of truth to that.
You mentioned Jim Collins. What's your favorite Jim Collins book? So I'm a huge fan of Jim Collins, huge fan. I'm reading Beyond Entrepreneurship 2.0, The Fly, all of them. I've read all of them already. They're great, wonderful case studies. So those are some of my favorite books. What's your favorite Jim Collins book? And then what's your favorite book?
Unfortunately, I can only comment on Good to Great, which is the only one
Okay.
I've read. And I loved it. And I've heard him on, there's a great podcast he's on with Shane Parrish on the Knowledge Project. And one thing I took away from that was something to the effect of like, go big, go early. Meaning some people are sheepish about sharing information because they don't know if they're going to get taken advantage of.
Yep.
They don't know what's going to happen. And his thought is like, be willing to be taken advantage of. Go and give and be generous and do it early. And if they screw you, then just move on. But it's going to encourage cooperation. That's probably the standout besides, putting the right person on the right bus. I'm going to get a lot of flack for this, but the Fountainhead was a big, Ayn Rand's Fountainhead was a huge influence on my life. I read it when I was 22 years old. A lot of people hate her writing. I'm not always aligned with her politics. When I hear interviews of her, I think she might be certifiably insane. But she wrote a magnificent tome that weighed heavily, again, timing wise, that hit me. But for those who may not know, but Howard Rourke is an architect that sort of beats to his own drum and, fights the powers that be, but is fighting to serve his own purpose and to be independent of other people. And that to me, it's a degree of agency that gave me a new perspective about solving my own issues, not relying on other people. So that probably is the most influential that comes to mind. But it's not really a business building book. I hate saying this because in my world, it's everybody has it, but Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Poor Dad is also changed my idea of money.
The first one, that was the first self-improvement, I guess, book that I ever read. It was Rich Dad Poor Dad, and then it was The Compound Effect. Those are the first two. My business partner's an engineer. He said, you got to read The Compound Effect. Very, very
I've never read
powerful.
The Compound Effect. I'll have to note that.
Darren Hardy, great book. And then The Flywheel by Jim Collins is like The Compound Effect, but more hardcore and for business. It's a good one.
Put that on my list.
Big fan of Jim Collins. I enjoy interviews or conversations like this because you get to see below the iceberg of what you see. I was thinking of this question. I didn't write it down because I didn't know how you'd react. But what is something that your wife would tell us about you that you would never tell us about yourself?
I think I'm a lot goofier than I come off.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, like in the right setting, around the right people.
Okay.
I think I'm
All
a
right.
little
What's a serious one that she would say that you would never tell us?
bit.
I'm not gonna let you get off that easy.
Oh, I thought you were thinking just something that people wouldn't expect.
No, give me something deep.
That's a tough one. I think people who know me sort of see most of me. I think that's a good question. Maybe that I'm just and I think about how investigative I am in my writing and stuff, and I don't necessarily think there'll be a surprise. I just think she'd maybe comment on how obsessive I can get. She would also echo how intense I am, so you're not alone there either.
Is there something that you feel like you're hyper passionate about that you wish people would ask you about more?
Honestly, I love these conversations. And I got a handful of people that I do have these occasionally, but I love this. This is I'll be humming for a while afterward, right? Because it's pushing the boundaries of, there's a little bit of, if we can get into a state of flow and we can repeat that process so that we can call upon it when we need to, that's like sort of the ultimate goal, right? Is if you can do that, it happens. And I felt flow at different points in my life for seconds, but one time I do feel flow is like in this act of creating something, even if it's my own words, just putting things together, writing. When I walk out of here, there's going to be a nice, maybe not that dissimilar after, a nice workout where or a nice yoga class where you're like, oh man, I feel like I'm floating a little bit. That's the juice.
100%. I've been pushing Marcus to do solo episodes. That's one of the reasons why, because I'm convinced once you do it for long enough, you'll hit flow. I'm convinced.
I'm not against it.
I know.
I'm not against it.
I know.
Look, the first hurdle was just getting over myself.
Yeah.
Which I think I may not have successfully done completely, but I'm improving. So before we end this, I do want to ask you though, like,
yeah, please
give me some feedback. And let me just, I'll set it up for you too.
Yeah, please.
Because I want to talk about the show for a few minutes here. There's a few things that I think have worked really well, and the things that I learned and still am learning. But the learning part was, for some reason, I wanted to make a chronology. So I started asking questions, attempting to make it chronological. And I go back to Hemingway, who's one of my favorite writers of all time, and just sort of like just get into the meat. And especially in today's world, if you don't capture them, an audience member, they're going to move on. I changed that, and I'm going in for the heavy hit at the beginning, which might throw people off a little bit. Although if you heard them, you probably expect it now. That's one thing that I learned. I'm learning to trust my instincts, so I come prepared. I've got questions, and I sort of let people meander, but I try and tie them back. I need to bet. I think I need to improve my copy putting out there. I need to improve the newsletter, and I need to improve audienceship. I don't know how to do that yet. I'm still figuring that out. But those are sort of the things that stand out, and things that I want to try next year is at least one panel, at least one or more in-person episodes. Thank you for providing suggestions on the microphone.
Yeah, I got you.
And start reaching for some, some guests that also can bring a lot to the table, and challenge me and challenge other people. So there's a springboard, but I want to hear your take on where you think I need to, most specifically, I want you to redline me, what I'm doing wrong. But if you feel like throwing in anything in there that you think is working, I'd love to hear that too.
I think you are very good at asking questions and world-class at what I call pulling the string. So this wasn't a good example of pulling the string because I wanted to just get as much content out as possible. But I think you're really good at asking a question and then riding that and just digging deeper, digging deeper. You might only get through 5 questions.
Yeah.
But you have so much depth that goes. And I don't know. I think now we live in a world where people are trying to focus on like, let me get the best clip. Let me make sure I can get something that's clip worthy. I think that's really good for breadth, but it's not good for depth. So I think you're really good at focusing on depth. That's something for sure. Got to do solos, non-negotiable. You're working towards it. That's something I guarantee. I don't know how to explain it, but it's something that's going to change the game. One thing that most people are struggling with right now is having the podcast and being good at podcasting just isn't enough anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be good at all the ancillary stuff. You got to be good at social. You got to be going on other podcasts. You have to have a place to house people. You just joined the Facebook group to see what that was about. That's the biggest thing that I'm seeing right now is the skill and the art of podcasting. It's not enough.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like any other business. Yeah, you can have a great product. It doesn't matter unless you get it out there, unless you market it right, that's a really big thing. What else?
What do you see separating of your clients and elsewhere, those between good and great?
I would say commitment to improvement. The clients that are doing the best are the clients who are working harder without me than when they're with me. They're doing their own thing and they're shooting shots and they're testing out stuff and they're always focused on figuring out what's working and what's not. That's a big one. Honestly, overall business understanding.
Mm-hmm.
When you and I first connected, you said, Kev, I know this is going to take a while. If somebody comes to me and says, I'm going to give it a month and see what happens, nothing's going to happen. But if somebody comes and says, let me give it a year minimum and see what happens, there's something to just having the survivor bias. If you last longer than anybody else, you're most likely going to be successful. The people who are solving a unique problem in a unique way for a unique person who can monetize at the bottom of their business tend to succeed longer because it becomes its own sustainable business. That's something I've been talking to you about. At some point, we gotta figure out what that looks like. But that's something that if you don't have that, you're just kind of pouring money down the drain month over month, and most people can't sustain that for very long. That the people who really have their story dialed in, because when you start going on other podcasts, people are going to ask you about your story. And if you can hit point A, point B, point C, point D, wrap it up, boom, there's something about that really helps you get familiar with the audience.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a big one. And then I would say the last one is they're really good at building community.
Mm-hmm.
The podcast, things are changing now and Spotify is really making a push for this, but you and I could listen to the same podcast and the host would have no idea unless you or I came out and said, hey, I listened to your podcast. You don't know. You have no idea what that number is, who that person next to that number is. We have no idea. So you have to create opportunities for audience to self-identify. And the podcasters that are doing that at the highest degree, from what I've seen, are the most successful statistically.
So 2 questions as we wrap up. One, I've gotten some flack from, I wouldn't say my from certain listeners that the sweet spot is 15 to 20 minutes. Granted, I've got a couple of episodes that have gone well over an hour because we were rolling and it was great. So selfishly, I just sort of went on with it. This is something I've batted around to keep it under 45 minutes so that it's digestible. I also think, we're starting to put markers in the episode. So if people want to sort of skip around with the transcript, they can understand it. What's your take there?
I went to, you were asking me about Podfest recently, or Podfest. I went 2 years ago, a year ago, whatever it was, and they said that the average length of the top performing shows was 59 minutes.
That's good to hear.
Well, Joe Rogan's like 3 hours, so that obviously...
Yeah, most of the greats are going to be, Tim Ferriss is up there and
so
the others.
I don't know, causation, correlation, I'm not sure. What I could literally do, and we'll do this, and we're trying to do this, you and I are working through it, we'll look at the consumption rate and we'll figure out exactly how long people are sticking around for, and that'll give us a really good piece. For me, it has to be fulfilling recording the episodes.
Yeah.
There's realistic. So there's realistic and there's ideal. Ideally, you'd hit the exact mark that everybody wants. Realistically, you might also be miserable recording 20-minute episodes with some of these amazing guests that you get the opportunity to talk with. My take is I care more about the longevity of the person than the playing the game from a performance perspective. That's me, at least.
What can you explain that?
Yeah. I didn't get to 1900 episodes by doing what is best for business. I got to 1900 episodes by doing what I enjoy doing. And I'm willing to lose for longer if that's what it takes, whatever it is, what it is. But I have to enjoy it. If I don't enjoy it, I've lost sight of why I started this in the first place.
Yeah.
I don't want this to feel like a job. I have to do X. I don't want that. So that's the philosophical answer. The tactical answer is 30 to 45 with a guest is probably ideal. 15 to 20 for solos is probably ideal if I had to give you a concrete answer.
Okay. One other question, which you alluded to, was, at what point, how many episodes within a certain amount of time frame where do you see like, look, dude, this isn't going anywhere? Is it 300 episodes? Is it 50 episodes? Or is it
first year? You can usually tell after the first year.
Yeah.
You can tell. I don't expect most podcasts to make money in the first year. Again, money's a measurement. Most people start because they want to make money, so that's why I use that. But after year one, and as long as you have all the other strategies, the social media stuff, the going on other podcasts, the Facebook group, that type of stuff, you can tell after a year. For sure.
All right. Well, thank you.
You have a ton of potential. You're very welcome. You have a ton of potential. It's just a matter of we just have to make sure you're doing the right things in the right way. I don't imagine this doesn't work. And I'm not just saying that because we're producing it. I would tell you. I would tell you.
Well, I appreciate all your contribution and help. You've been a coach and on the podcast front and helping produce it. It's been as joyful as anything I've pursued. It's also nice to be not peppered by a client or an investor or just sort of doing it on my own because I'm feeding my own mind. So anyway, any closing thoughts?
I mirror it back to you. You've been a pleasure to work with. I'm glad the timing came and you stopped ghosting us and came back. I'm very glad, and I very much look forward to continuing our relationship and seeing you succeed and helping and adding value anywhere I can. And doing this again. I'm happy to do this as much as you want.
Yeah, I would love that. Thank you, brother. Appreciate you being on.
Appreciate you having me.